my name's Dean Matheson. I'm one of the directors of Common Centred. Common Centred is a community interest company based in Chappertown, Leeds. It's an area that's high on the deprivation scales. And what we do is we work with primarily Black, African and Caribbean men, simply because the data sets do show that that's where a lot of work and attention is actually needed. We were working as a grassroots organization for a number of years actually now. Sometimes I'm amazed at how long we've been going. But things really picked up momentum, and there was that, we were starting to get really good feedback from people in terms of the services, which we'll come on to. But we decided to get official and get incorporated in January 2015. That's when we registered as a community interest company. That seemed to be the best model for us in terms of what we do. So we got registered, and the portfolio of services, which are pretty much co-produced with Black people in the community, in and around the community, and the portfolio of services grew from there. But with a main theme, the main theme was cultural competency, truly meeting the needs of those in and around the community, and co-producing everything with them, and basically tackling a lot of the health inequalities that we could see. We know that health inequalities, it involves a lot of overlapping issues, intersectionality, so from housing to finance, all the stresses, and influencing wider determinants that affect somebody's well-being. So we knew that we would have to really focus on where work would be best focused, if you like, for the very best outcomes that we could achieve. So essentially, that's what we're all about. Our approach is crisis prevention. We believe that prevention is better than a cure. And if somebody does hit crisis, then to help them not to repeat that, not to help them from getting there again, if you like. So that's what we're all about. Crisis prevention, self-care. A lot of it is from old wisdom, teach a man how to fish, then you actually feed him for life, as opposed to just giving a man a fish for a day. So you just feed him for the day. So self-care it follows that principle, really, rather than just interventions, one-off interventions that might not last the test of time in terms of outcomes. Far better to get people to recognize their own triggers and manage that. No doubt we'll come on to some of that in more detail. But essentially, that's our main approach. I think one of the reasons why we're getting the outcomes that we're getting and the feedback that we're getting from, we work with Black men and women, but we do have projects that focus purely on Black men. And one of the reasons why we get the kind of outcomes that we're getting and the feedback that we're getting, as I say, is the first thing I would say is trust. A lot of mainstream providers, for whatever reason, don't have that trust relationship with Black men. There could be various reasons for that, various barriers for that, such as a bad previous experience with other mainstream providers. And sometimes a sense that they just don't understand where you're coming from. Also, this is what people have shared with me. This is what men have shared with me in terms of previous experiences with previous providers. So these are things to actually learn from. If you've had a bad experience, if you feel like you're misunderstood and misinterpreted, yeah, and that could be for cultural reasons. Yeah, and so that hits, there's poor communication when one doesn't feel understood. Sometimes, as we know, communication isn't just verbal. There's body language, and sometimes body language is a part of culture. So if you're misunderstanding body language and misinterpreting it, then there's a breakdown in communication. So what we're finding is, because our emphasis is cultural competency and cultural sensitivity, we're able to communicate and to understand and be understood. So that aids the communication, a two-way communication. Without a two-way communication, there is no communication. You can't have one-way communication that becomes a monologue as opposed to a dialogue. So it's really important that both parties are understood and understands the other. So that's what we're finding. I think a lot of that is to do with the fact that we have that experience. As ourselves as providers, as well as the service users, we've all experienced racism. We've all experienced discrimination. We get it. We understand one another. So that just helps to build that trust. Once you build that trust, it helps the men to be a lot more open. We all know anybody from any culture, any society, any community will tell you that when it comes to men are harder to engage with. Men tend to bottle things up. They're not as expressive as their female counterparts for various reasons. So it's so important to really nurture that relationship, that trusting relationship, where men feel that they're in a space that they can open up and can share freely their experiences. Because it's only by doing that we can get to the heart of the matter. Where some of our Black counsellors and psychotherapists, which we're glad to have on board as part of our network of counsellors and psychotherapists, they understand that too, because obviously they've got the experience, the lived experience, if you like, of being Black in the UK. So that all of that put together really does help to get the outcomes that we're getting, and that's my understanding as to why some aren't getting that engagement. Because what I often find is some of these areas could be improved in terms of engagement with Black men. It was so important for us to have our own network of Black counsellors and psychotherapists. This is what we were finding the men were saying that would be of help. So we've had people who've been for counselling before, but had not the greatest experience. And a lot of the times what we're hearing is it was like an awkwardness in the room. Just the communication really wasn't there, wasn't the best. So this is what we're getting. And if you think about it, it actually does make sense. If we're talking about cultural competency and cultural sensitivity, more often than not, he who feels it knows it. It's those who've been through something. This is why I think everybody would appreciate, of all walks of life and communities, that those of lived experience, you need to listen to them. There's a reason for that, because they've been through it. So that's what we're finding. So with Black counsellors and psychotherapists, they have an experience of what it is to be Black in the UK. So they share that in common with the client. Also, in terms of cultural resonance, if you like, and as I say, competency and sensitivity, that's more easily achieved when you're coming from similar cultural backgrounds and upbringing and all the rest of it. We could share the same jokes and experiences, the same anecdotal experiences as well, that are quite unique to that specific, to those cultures. So that's what we're finding. As I say, trust. It just helps to develop trust. When people feel that they've been understood, when you see somebody of your own culture looking back at you, that can and does, it's been proven to work. It helps the men to feel as though they can open up more and be understood. So instead of wondering, I wonder if I'm being understood, and then that becoming the elephant in the room, how about getting rid of the elephant altogether, so that the men can actually have the actual counselling, receive the counselling that they're supposed to receive without other issues complicating the whole experience. And so that's what we find. And it's not that anybody else can't help, but we find that to be the real optimum ideal scenario, really, if we're serious about truly culturally competent services. It's quite interesting because there's all these if you like, modern phrases, jargon, and call it what you will. One of them being co-production. And the thing is, it's an ancient wisdom. When you think about it, there's nothing new about co-production. It just means working together. It means listening to others and responding to that. It means with you know, it's always been true, hasn't it? That united we stand, divided we fall. Yeah. So for us, we were doing what's called co-production before we knew it was a thing. Before we knew there was a term for it. I mean, it just made sense to listen to what people need as opposed to assuming what people need. Um, you know, um, this idea of charging in like the cavalry to save the day, or being helicoptered in to save an area. First, that doesn't make it because you've got all the answers. That's never made any sense to myself and my colleagues. We've always known people often, if you give them half the chance, people actually, and you give them a space to explore their own thoughts and experiences, people often have the solutions. We shouldn't patronize people in any way, shape, or form. People often know what the problem is and the best way to resolve it, given half the chance and given the platform and the freedom and the space, a safe enough space to share that, without fear. So that's, we've been co-producing, so to speak, for since the outset, right from the get-go. We're really pleased to have our network of Black counsellors and psychotherapists, and one of the motives for that as well was because one of the issues when it comes to Black people is often it's seen as the only intervention is drug-based therapies, and we spoke about trust. A lot of Black men won't even talk about their issues because they don't want to be drugged up, so to speak. So that becomes a barrier in and of itself. Well, I'm not going to go and seek any help because all they do is drug you up. Their terminology, not mine. Make you into a vegetable. Their terminology. That's what they say. So we've got to listen to what people are saying. There needs to be a lot more talking therapies, because if you're going to get to drugs, don't help. Really, it just what it does is it just might quiet the person down, stop certain behaviors perhaps, yeah, but it's not dealing with the issues. It's not dealing with the underlying issues. With the counseling and the psychotherapy, that's the whole purpose, to start dealing with those issues, to get the dialogue going. Yes, a bit more psychodynamic interventions, get people talking, get them exploring what are the factors, what they're going through. Especially if they, like I say, if it's psychotherapy where you're exploring past experiences and how that could be playing an influence in what's being played out in the present. There needs to be more of that, and it needs to be a lot more culturally competent. So in the final analysis, that is what's needed. That's what people are asking for. The feedback and the outcomes speak for themselves on that. So that's we want to see more of that happening. From my perspective, in terms of future goals, where I'd like to see things heading, locally and actually globally, is, first of all, I think we need to appreciate that, if you like, counseling, even counseling and psychotherapy, is just one component. It may not even be for everybody. That's another thing. We can't expect one fits all sorts of thing, not if we're being truly person-centered, right? Which is why we have so many other, if you like, activities and interventions. Some people, for example, in our Coping with Bereavement project, as well as having bereavement counsellors, we've actually got just active listeners who are not counsellors. And for some people, that's enough. Just to have a one-to-one with one of our active listeners, right? For them, that's just the opportunity to offload, just to share with someone, regardless of even their experience and qualifications. Often, yeah, maybe experience of being active listeners, but not necessarily as fully qualified counselors or psychotherapists. Even that works for some people, and the feedback for that is often great. Others want to go beyond that conversation and speak to a more, a professional, and take that conversation to another deeper level. Great, and so we can provide that. So what I want to say is, on going forward, and ideally, because we're talking this is a multifaceted issue. Not one piece of work is going to solve all the issues. Like I said, health inequalities, it's intersectional. There's so many wider determinants that impact on the well-being. So actually, what I'd like to see is the principles that we work by, the cultural competency, for example, to use that buzzword, if you like, the cultural competency, then other services need to be culturally competent, not just counseling and psychotherapy. Yeah. Whenever there's engagement with a community, there needs to be the cultural competency to go along with that. Whether that is, in all walks of life. So, and even if it's an awareness and not an assumption of what a culture needs or a community needs, but hearing from them and incorporating that into policies, into procedures, into ways of working, into, in the work ethical framework needs to reflect the community that you're working with. So that's what I like to see, because it needs to be happening. As I say, there's so many different factors that we need to bear that in mind. So whether somebody's working in housing, whether it's social work, whether it's all the other professions, yeah, there are some shared themes that every service deliverer, everybody who's delivering a service, can learn from and share, to make sure that we truly doing our best to eradicate it. Everybody benefits from everybody being being well. Every society, every community, yeah, every nation is improved when everybody is weller and therefore more productive. It's just a win-win all around. So that's what I want to see. People weller, black men weller, with less of these triggers and stresses that are needless, really. And that way everybody benefits. And it might sound corny, but ultimately that would lead to a better world.